it's got a time up here, man. That's really great. So let's just start by getting, I can just about see you. Can we do hands up who's actually a publisher first, so that I can just see how many we've got here? Okay, thank you. Can you keep your hands up for a second? Because I can't, yeah, that's it. Okay, can you keep your hands up if you made more money last year than you did the year before? Oh, more hands going up. Okay, let's try that a little bit harder. Can you keep your hands up if you actually made a profit last year? Whoa, this business is in good health. That's it, we don't have to worry about this. I can give you some of the answers to why that is right now. Okay, so I was asked to talk about myths and realities, and I've got a script because actually I want to make sure I don't forget a few things. I've got a couple of concerns with the title though, because there's not really much that's out there we're going to talk about that is actually a myth. Basically, it's real and it's happening and it's pretty serious. So raising awareness of reality actually isn't really helpful either in the next 18 minutes and 38 seconds. Pointing fingers at suspects might actually be quite comforting, but it doesn't really help much. It's our responsibility as publishers to help reform this. And so if we get into realities and responsibilities of advertising, which is what I want to talk about, I want to talk about reforming the suspects. Seeing them as an opportunity to drive change and to enhance our leadership of the industry is the only way we're going to move forward. You can tell by the way I'm holding my bit of paper that I was expecting a lectern. Yeah? So I might end up sitting down in a second. What are we worried about? Well, what we should be worried about is all this lot. The advertising ecosystem's basically under threat. It's the basis of a lawsuit which is going on right now between two separate groups of French publishers who are preparing a lawsuit against an online ad blocking software company called AdBlock Plus, you probably know about. It's also the diagnosis of Google, who at the event I was at in Dublin recently mentioned a bit of research that they'd done showing that a large number of online advertisements are not actually visible, and they put that out publicly more recently. It's the conclusion of a growing number of clients grappling with a lack of transparency, and it's the threat of fraud. So there are plenty of potential scapegoats for all this, but let's have a little closer look at the suspects. And are they really acting alone? We've become very accustomed to pointing our fingers as publishers at them and blaming them. So suspect number one, I'll come to in just a second. But before I do, I want to say, are these suspects really the only ones responsible for the undermining of online advertising? In this presentation, we'll look at the case against each suspect, and we're asked what proportion of the responsibility actually lies with the accused, and what proportion with perhaps the advertisers and publishers themselves. Because a little bit like a mayor deciding the future of a rough neighborhood. We have a choice where online advertising is concerned. We can write this area off as murky, to pick up on Tim's word, as untrustworthy and as unmeasurable, an area which client procurement people are giving advertising agencies a really hard time about right now through lack of transparency. One of the big things holding back programmatic is that the buying clients who also buy television and print say it's totally non-transparent, it's failing the audit process. There's a massive amount of pushback. Some of the change in behavior by trading desks just recently has got a lot of that behind it. Yeah. We can write it off as murky, unmeasurable, untrustworthy, an area that we ask to deliver results, but we'd rather not know how these results are achieved. We'd rather just sit and embrace murkiness. Or we can engage with the environment. We can work with the constraints of the situation. We can find creative solutions and shine the light on a more transparent advertising environment that can fulfill its proper potential. And by the way, sunlight, light, is the best disinfectant of all. So suspect number one, if you want to write down the list, ad blocking technology. For many, including those threatening to sue, this is the number one suspect. threatening the very existence of the industry as it's going now. In fact, I've heard people say, oh, you better go with native because it's the only way around ad blocking technology. Well, it won't be for very long, will it? But can we really blame technology providers for the fact that consumers want to avoid advertising? As well as telling us about that percentage of unseen advertisements, Google also said quietly in Dublin that they'd spotted a clear correlation between the lack of skippable pre-roll advertising and the downloading of ad-blocking software. Yeah. A straight correlation between those two things. Yeah. If advertisers are reluctant to cede any control to consumers, and if they resent being forced to deliver ads that consumers want to consume, then consumers will take matters into their own hands. So publishers actually have a certain responsibility here about the way in which we present messages. 30 billion ads a month to 4 million people, most of whom, not all of whom are actually online. If you do 4 million as opposed to 4.5, because it's easy to do the maths, that's 7,500 a month to each person, 250 a day to each person. That's slightly higher than you probably want. Yeah. But actually, it's the publishers that have put that number of advertisements into the field. Yeah. Said all that. Suspect number 2. What's now colloquially known in the business as NHT, which sounds like some nasty disease, but in fact stands for non-human traffic. Yeah. Also known as cooking the books. 30 to 60% of online traffic is estimated to be non-human. 30 to 60%. There's no reforming those who perpetrate criminal botnet fraud. But we shouldn't ignore the role the industry has played in enabling this crime to take place. We've all benefited from page view figures that are naturally inflated by the noise in the data. And many websites are buying in traffic, which is a key enabler of this kind of crime. We can have a more transparent industry, but we have to be brave in order to do so. More transparent advertising won't happen without more commitments to transparency from advertisers and media owners. The Media Trust, a rival to a great presentation we had yesterday, says in the USA, 40 of the top 50 ComScore publishers scan for malware. In the UK, we don't have that number. 20 to 25% of malware creates bot traffic. It comes via the ecosystem that is the advertising ecosystem, and it is trackable. That lackadaisical attitude basically allows the bad guys to prosper in our neighborhood. We're talking about bot networks, we're talking about toolbars on browsers, we're talking about stealing credit card data, and we're talking about ad injectors on your site where you think you're serving advertisements, but you're not actually getting paid because somebody's put an ad on top of yours. Yeah, that's what goes on. So to quote Chris Olson from the Media Trust in the States, ad-supported sites must consider the consumer. If malware drops on the user, we can lose that customer. We should lose that customer. Here's the big one, yeah? Cisco just did a white paper last summer. I'll send it to you if you want it. It pointed out that consumers are 8 times more likely to be hit with malware on a premium publisher site than they are on a porn ecosystem site. 8 times more likely on a premium publisher. And so how come that is the case? Well, it's about lackadaisical attitude, and it's also because, like that old thing about why do you rob banks because that's where the money is, why do you put malware on premium publisher sites? Because that's where all the good data is, and that's where all the audience is. So that's exactly what's going on. So if you're not paying attention to that, you're actually letting the bad guys prosper in your neighborhood. Many publishers care a lot more about creative content compliance than they do about monetization. When it comes to monetization, they have a sort of double standard. Oh, let it run, we need the money. I say, pay attention to code that is injected onto your site. Pay attention to code that is injected onto your site. Yeah. Suspect number 3. Lack of frequency control. This is quite interesting. It may not be as deliberate as botnet fraud, but serving the same ad to the same consumer repeatedly is similarly responsible for inflating numbers and undermining the meaningfulness of results. There was a fantastic presentation from the chairman of Walker Media in the UK at a Quantcast event, where he showed what happened after he visited Marks and Spencer's, a retail site in the UK, to buy a sweater for his mother. Yeah. And then more than 60 times over a period of 3 months, he was shown advertisements for sweaters from Marks and Spencer's. In fact, there was one sequence on the Guardian website where he saw nothing but advertisements for sweaters. Yeah. We all know that, and we laugh. We're actually also totally complicit in this room for letting that happen. Totally complicit. Yeah. And the worst thing about it, he said, was never once did the advert for the Marks and Spencer's sweater, which he hadn't bought because it hadn't been in stock, never once was one of those advertisements saying, oh, by the way, that sweater is now in stock. Would you like to come back and get it? Yeah. It was always for a different color and a different one. It's quite clear they had no idea whether he bought one or not. Yeah. So it's actually not the technology that's at fault there. It's the way in which the media buying's been done. The technology will do what it tells. Technology only does what you tell it to do. Who set the frequency on that? It ran over 3 months until he decided to clear his cookies to stop it. So is the publisher at fault? Yeah. The publisher's letting CPC and CPA campaigns on the site where the advertiser will just keep on running until they've achieved their objective. No one gives a monkeys about the user seeing the same ad over and over and over again. When I worked at Saatchi's in the 80s and 90s, the TV metric for the number of times you should run a TV spot before you started to upset the user and get a negative impact was 11. 11. When DoubleClick first put out online banner advertisements, the survey they did back in 1998 about how many times, what level you could set frequency control at, DoubleClick's first answer was 3. And those of us who have been around here since 1998 will know that to be true. What are we doing now? Yeah. So that's quite interesting, I think. Suspect number 4. And those of you who are British will get this. So data don't, oh God, going too fast. Data don't make us a person. We've heard this, I'll skip through this quickly. Relying purely on data, actually Connor said this better than me, I might just move on since I'm moving out of time. Basically, it boils down to context and data gives you the audience insight. First party is really important. And actually we need to pay attention because the IAB is telling us that 2 years after the European Commission's data protection reforms were first discussed, they could move forward dramatically this year and businesses may have to really pay attention. There are 3 things to think about coming from the IAB and they're telling us in Europe. 3 new changes, biggest effect on digital advertisers and marketeers. They include a broadening of the scope of personal data to include data used for advertising purposes, a requirement for explicit consent to process such data, and the potential limitations on the ability to build audience segments. So bad use of data, Connor said it, let's move on. All right. Invisible ads. 56% of ads, as I said earlier on, supposedly viewed but actually invisible. In some ways, you should think about this the other way round. Until you bear in mind that almost all cases this is a voluntary decision on the part of the advertisers or the planners. They target inventory that is borderline visible because it's cheap, yeah? And because it can still deliver results. In many ways, they're being innovative and entrepreneurial, I guess. And they're being so because it works for them. How much is the ability to know that you're targeting a male or a female worth, yeah, versus not knowing? So if you're buying at 50 cents, being able to target a male in this environment is not worth more than 49 more cents. Because if it's 50 cents more, you might as well just buy the cheap stuff and not care about whether you're hitting men or women because you're buying it cheap and you don't care about the consumer anyway, so that's how you buy it. Yeah? The publishers are the only people that are going to be responsible in this environment for the way in which the advertising ecosystem develops and improves. And premium publishers are not necessarily standing up to that story. Yeah. All of which means pointing the finger at the lack of visibility of ads seems unfair. If you want to ensure that your ads appear in a quality environment where they're really properly visible, then you need to plan on that basis. And you as a publisher need to do that work. You shouldn't be relying on the IAB standards to take care of visibility for you, because apart from anything else, the US IAB report says that measurement differences between the accredited providers of viewability actually vary 30 to 40% anyhow. So it actually falls into our camp to work out. Also, ComScore say in the States that if you've got really high visibility scores, the chances are that equals high bot traffic. Yeah. And so that's something else that you need to pay attention. So think very hard about what you're doing about viewability. It's a very interesting metric to worry about. Another interesting little phrase for people is we're now seeing in the States an argument about dark viewability. This is, I heard this the other day. The Washington Post are complaining that actually the tracking systems aren't even counting the things that they know are viewable. Yeah. And so there's an undercount of dark viewability. So we've got quite a long way to go with all this. So invisible ads, another suspect in this whole game. All right, suspect number 6, only 2 more to go. Got enough time. False promises on measurement. An excuse to focus on payment on results, I guess. Behind many of the usual suspects listed above are what many see as a bigger culprit. Online advertising has failed to deliver what it promised, where measurability is concerned. Advertisers feel betrayed, and the response of some appears to be to give up on most aspects of online measurement altogether. Dentsu, the CEO no less, recently argued that advertisers are best served by sticking to payment by results and ignoring other forms of measurement. The exact opposite of what we heard from Adform earlier on. Yeah. Payment by results may be reassuring for some individual advertisers, but it's certainly not reassuring as far as the general quality of online advertising is concerned. Ads are free to annoy consumers and to look terrible. It seems to say, provided they produce the right numbers, at the end of the day, who cares? It's also unnecessary because advertisers should really know better than to write off a channel as a measurable brand-building tool just because its measurement isn't wholly precise. TV measurement has never been that way, and yet TV has successfully built almost all of today's major brands. It's at least a century since John Wanamaker first said, "Half the money I spend on advertising is wasted. The trouble is I don't know which half." Let's not throw our hands up in sudden despair as is an issue that has been part of marketing from longer than any of us have been, even longer than me. Yeah. And so what I'm really saying here is, we can't do perfect measurement, so what? Neither can any other media, and we actually compete with other media. And I just want to say a few bits on programmatic. This bit is the bit that really annoys me, because we heard that earlier on, yeah? The ads that come back onto your site turn out to be the ads that are actually targeting your wife, because it isn't really quite clever enough. The only real solution is a login personal ID system. I know quite a few exponents who've got one family computer at home who basically ask the family to use a different browser. So the kids use IE, you use Firefox, your wife uses Chrome, so that this kind of targeting doesn't happen. Because this kind of rubbish targeting means if you go onto Amazon, basically, and then you go onto a website that's allowing Amazon to retarget straight across, then you're going to find out what your wife bought you for Christmas. I think that's really a sin. Yeah? But to put programmatic into the suspect lineup is to misunderstand what programmatic is and what it could be. Programmatic's real potential, as we heard from Connor, is online advertising to enable better and more holistic strategic planning, automation to empower a range of different advertising approaches. If we take a blinkered view of it as simply a cost-cutting exercise, which quite a lot of the buy side is really doing, then it's likely to deliver the results we deserve. If we want programmatic to deliver better quality online advertising that engages consumers at the right time and in the right environment, then we need to program it to do so, because it's only software and it only does what we tell it to do. Yeah. And so that's really my summary. Could the prime suspects actually be the advertisers themselves, and then, by inference, what the publishers are actually allowing the advertisers to do? Yeah. Really, though, they're simply diverting attention from those who have the ultimate responsibility. As I've tried to show with the suspects I've run through, the key to improving online advertising is for media owners to take responsibility for the state of their own industry. Online advertising is largely what we make it and what we're prepared to allow to happen. And if we aren't happy with the state of it currently, then we need to alter the terms of engagement, which is how online advertising should really take place. And you see that. I've heard today as an absolute the first time I met Tim Fairclough, by the way, was at an ad tech event when I stood up on stage and said something negative about programmatic and was actually heckled, and Tim stood up for me. And here we are, 3 years later, in an environment where people are starting to say, stay away from this open online place, it's just absolute chaos. You know, and are actually brave enough to say it. The FT in the back corner there, doing email probably. Go, John. No, he's waving it. They've dropped out of that marketplace altogether, beginning to take a bit of a hold on this, turning the game around. The dog that wags its own tail, old Irish proverb. Yeah. So, how do we deal with this troubled neighborhood? Yeah. We take responsibility for its future. I've run out of time. But really, we're part of the problem. The solution is our own control. I've said that. I don't need to say again. We can talk about it as a manifesto, or actually we can think about what we're really doing. It was 12 years ago when I was working at Microsoft that we had 6 ad units on the homepage of MSN. Yeah. We took 6 off and we put 1 back on, and the sales team screamed blue murder at us. And at the end of the fiscal, we'd made more money from the homepage than we had when we had 6 units. Yeah. It's called demand and supply, or economics. Yeah. 30 billion ads in Ireland for 4 million people. Thank you very much.